meeting. Really appreciate you inviting me here. Chris, I'm not gonna call him out any more than 5 minutes ago, but I've got some slides. Here, sitting here listening this morning, I'm typically one of those that's gonna go off script, a little bit more, mind, some thoughts. But honestly, I'm here for y'all, to provide information as where I can. It's funny, I look back on kind of my journey and how did I even end up here. I mean, I grew up on a small ranch in Central Texas, and my whole career's been in Central Texas, but worked for the DoD 20 years, one way or another, from, like I said, a park ranger to managing military installations, actually being at Army headquarters, supporting 75 garrisons, manage their natural resources across the globe. So I had the ability to travel the world and still have some. I feel like I'm pretty high mileage. And so I hate seeing folks that are going through things, that there's other solutions out there, other stuff. So a little bit cross-pollination piece. Really appreciate Mike Brennan putting a little spin in there for conservation without conflict. It's an amazing emerging organization. I mean, we mentioned there's a lot of Fish and Wildlife Service and other folks involved in that. It's grassroots landowners. And I mean, I think there's a Leopold quote. We just did a 50th ESA symposium for this tier leadership cohort, which is a Texas thing, Texas Wildlife chapter, but it basically talks about Aldo Leopold, the father of wildlife management. The public is, the survival of species within the public realm is going to rely on the private state. That it's private landowners that are going to get us there, and all these lands were there at one point in time. So I kind of tailored this talk, one on environmental baseline, but to talk about some of these programs I've been involved in, both at an installation and at headquarters level, that it wouldn't have worked without private landowners. It wouldn't have worked without collaboration. I think it's kind of what's interesting and unique with the Department of Defense is we own, manage, control anything inside that defense, inside that fence line that we want to. We've got actual clauses in the act that exempt us from things that nobody else is exempted from. So we can take advantage of the national defense part. We can critical habitat, not here, national defense. There's things written into that law that gives them that out, but they see the value of the community and being part of this defense community and defense community resilience, because the people that are working on the installation live and work in that community as well, just like I did. I traveled back and forth to that installation for my job. I wasn't enlisted. So having that broader picture and opening that after to really understand that everyone's coming from a different location and values that installation differently. Really, when they have an initiative that goes outside the fence line, you got to kind of approach that differently. So next slide, please. Like I said, this is a compilation of a lot of different stuff, a lot of different funded things. Don't need to dwell on that, but definitely give a nod to this is 20 years in the making that I didn't realize I'd be involved in some of these things with lots of different twists and turns. Next slide, please. So I can read what the environmental baseline says. Y'all probably read this, understand it. I don't know it just off the top of my head, but it's basically just the status of species. And there's all different ways that you can talk about that. The environmental baseline, like what is it? It's utilized to calculate this action's effects on the overall totality of the species within this action area, within that action area. But really it's articulating that's the currency of all these different things that are going on within different areas that species might be present or habitat. How do we talk about it? Next slide, please.
Jean, we've lost sound again.
How's that for sound?
Oh, good.
Good to go. Thank you.
Thank you. So as you can tell there, lots of people invested funds in it, lots of acres protected, 6,000 acres went into conservation, and 3,400 acres mitigated on post. So if you go to the next slide, please. You can tell that the picture on the left, there's lots of spots that green habitat was in and around. There was we didn't have a single maneuver area that didn't have an endangered species consideration. We had to consider it no matter what we did. Every prescribed burn, every land management activity, every military activity, every time we went through the NEPA process, you name it, we didn't have it. And then we were going through joint basing. So now the Air Force is moving more, gonna make it a joint base, more medical training there, this kind of training. So as you can tell, there's some opened up a lot of white space there on that map. So now it's completely unrestricted. Well, now that makes it easier. Well, what it did is it also made it easier for the Fish and Wildlife Service to say, you know what? We understand what's still there on the installation, what's their contribution, but now we have this affirmative contribution over here in perpetuity in these conservation easements. That's now enhanced the baseline of that whole region. It can take the value off of that. So now it's starting to take some of those T&E pressures off of others. So we did it specifically for us on installation, but now by, rising that, rising tides raises all ships. By doing that, any other action needs to occur in and around Bear County, the surrounding regions, get to say, hey, look, there's already this, if the recovery goal is 10,000 acres in this 5-county area, they've already underwritten about 6,000 acres of that, so that's kind of part of that baseline look of how this helps. Next slide. I don't know if that's how everybody did business. I didn't realize till I got to Army headquarters that other installations didn't have just these easy programs to be able to expand their mission footprint, their ability to train. This is one that actually Mike Brennan started with Office of Secretary of Defense. It's on a pre-listing species, a candidate species. You can do it with the gopher tortoise. This is in the southeast. It's big lead consultation. They wanted a conference on it. But they wanted to set this up to where it wasn't just Camp Bullis. It was anybody to tear off of it. So any willing landowner that's interested, any federal agency, others that could participate within this realm, how could we expand that bubble to others, not just be such a purposeful, this installation, this acre, this installation, this acre. Next slide, please. And ultimately, there were some keystone transactions. This Lindau tract was a working forest, 7,000 acres. Think about the timber value that's sitting on that. Working with timber companies, it's still managed for timber, it's still managed for public recreation, even now that it's been enrolled in this conservation program. We have donors on there, even private donors. So some of these things started to build momentum. It was no longer just the DoD doing it for themselves for this one thing. I started to capture some momentum, and there's benefits for the landowners. I should have probably mentioned this on the other one. All those ranches that were put under current conservation easement are still in those families. They still got the tax breaks for doing those conservation easements. They got the fee payments up front for the value of that conservation easement. Same thing here. This was Georgia DNR was the partner, Georgia Department of Natural Resources. So now it's a public area that people can go to. It's still actively timbered. So the industry this wasn't a change of just preserve. This was the industry is still supported the timber industry because there's active harvest needed to maintain that open pine dominated woodland for this species. So really all it did was change ownership, fund the landowner, and then bring other people to the game. And it was sufficient, this along with other initiatives were sufficient enough to preclude the listing, the need to list that species. So again, we're talking about something on the front end, something that's been a candidate species for years and years and years. But enough momentum gathered around this strategy and a couple of others, the CCA, Candidate Conservation Agreement with assurances, some of those things on those front end of species listings that were utilized, and it was ultimately 2 years ago precluded from the need to list. And no one has to worry about it. Next slide. That piece of property being one of the most significant ones that was out there for gopher tortoise also contained other species, proposed species, listed species. That conservation value and that baseline is still there for those as well. Consideration of the service and also consideration of the DoD if they ever wanted to do an offsetting, but again, working lands now maintaining a working lands, and this actually conversion of part of the public estate. So none of these are recommendations for here, but just how these things help benefit like the baseline and how some of these strategic efforts, when they're posed and phrased and brought in different contexts, how you start to get these unconventional partnerships. You start to see people like rally around, you know what? That may not be my exact piece of the pie, but I see where it helps someone else's. And so let's all fund a piece of this pie. And as we do that, we start to see those biological gains. We get to make sure working lands stay working lands. We get to make sure that interests are maintained. So next slide. As you can see, and I'm not going to belabor all these, because now I know I'm the one that's standing between y'all and lunch. I'm either going to be standing between you and lunch or trying to wake you up after, so challenge accepted either way. It's been done in other locations. So Fort Benning has not done it on an ecosystem basis. So all these others were species. It's now expanded the aperture. You know, like I said, this is over 20 years. Each one of these things saying, oh, we could do a little bit better, we could do a little bit different. Look at how that was done. So now we're looking at, you know, a whole ecosystem and a suite of species that are, now we can tie together with these causal links. If we're doing what's good for the open pine habitat, it's good for I was gonna say the Gulf Warmer, the RCW. Too many acronyms. If I come up with an acronym, call me out on that. That's a question definitely ask now. I don't want to run past one of those. But this is an ecosystem store. And so now they're starting to trickle down into, well, we're not gonna have to worry about as many of those future species listings because we're doing what's right for this current cohort. We're doing what's right for this component of this ecosystem. And so now we're talking about Eastern indigo species, and in one of the two pilot projects that Mike Brennan mentioned, one at TBLM and one in Georgia, is capitalizing on just that. Setting up a framework when next species X, gopher frog, is proposed for uplisting, downlisting, relisting. You can screen it through this criteria. So we're already managing for the ecosystem. It's good. There's no change. Amend the consultation, do a simple NEPA, move out, you know, so that we just might need to monitor that species. Next slide, please. Fort Benning is massive. They've actually got a non-wasting endowment. We funded about a $9 million non-wasting endowment that funds the management and activities on those properties specifically, not including the timber revenue. So all of those lands, it's about 50,000 total, 29,000 that is red-cockaded woodpecker or potential endangered species type habitats. All of those now are either, you know, working forest lands or continue to be working forest lands, either through Nature Conservancy or through Georgia DNR. And really, you see where their small initial investments actually grew and grew and grew all the way to a full endowment. So next slide, please. Other folks are interested in it, you know, but let's go ahead and next slide. This is really what it comes down to. It's those things that we thought about. Those we were talking about, and I saved this to the end. Each one of those programs, the direct underlying theme is the direct destruction of T&E habitat on that military installation. It's to remove that habitat because it's incompatible, or it's a need to open that space up or utilize that space for a new training mission. But it's done is in the first recording, it's as an otherwise lawful activity. You know, the Endangered Species Act doesn't say you can't kill species, doesn't say that you can't do those. It says you can't do that purposefully. But there are processes for otherwise lawful activities. If you follow the process, you can get to a space to where you can move and work within there. And now you're balancing baseline and you're above jeopardy. And so this is that. Now we're talking about Fish and Wildlife Service terminology. What are they doing behind closed doors when they're making listing decisions, looking at things like that? This is where this starts to come into play. This is the military is not purposefully looking to destroy that habitat. What the military is doing is they want to conduct their otherwise lawful activity of preparedness of the armed forces. And sometimes that is incompatible with the needs of the species, as you saw at Camp Bullis. Sometimes it's very synergistic, works really well, like at Fort Benning, that open pine woodland, it's actually great. But at some point in time, you do so great there and grow so many species, you're constantly doing consultations, you're constantly doing NEPA, you're constantly having to create this compliance loop that doesn't look at that longevity. So that's what these kind of programs do, is make sure all these things occur within the legal nexus, the appropriate nexus, provide for this off-post conservation that keeps working lands working, and also uplifts that baseline to then make it a little bit easier for everyone out in the grounds. But if we multi-partner solutions, we said these were custom discussed, none of these are easy. You know, when you're really talking about how we're gonna credit this, and can you trade this red cockaded woodpecker credit for this gopher tortoise credit, you know, so a lot of this is translating as biologists what we think and know into something that we can verify, monitor, prove. We'll stand up in court because the service is going to be the one that gets sued, you know, so the service is our direct partner in this. You know, we're proposing an action, they're going to give us an opinion. They're going to get sued. We'll end up with the injunction on our activity, or we'll be exposed to those prohibitions of Section 9, which essentially violated commander to jail. Seek out and motivate, seek out and identify what motivates partners. This might have started with an installation. These are all installation rooted. Like I say, I'm going back to that because this is what I know. But it all started with community outreach. You know, are people even receptive to conservation easements? What are the working lands out there that might be compatible with this? What are their needs for the resources? And they're not always as simple as this, especially when you start, as I've started looking at Klamath. And when you start talking about the Southeast, the timber industry and rotational pine is exactly what the species needs. That's exactly what the industry needs. We don't cut the trees down, we don't get revenue. We don't cut the trees down, we don't get habitat turnover, we don't get the ecosystem benefits. It fits. When you start talking about something like water we need for irrigation here, water we need for fishes here. Those are two completely different avenues. And so I worked some of that too. Edwards Aquifer in Texas Hill Country, we pumped water from Edwards Aquifer to utilize it on the installations and within this whole like multi-county region. There's species that are listed off post, 15 miles off my installation, that we have to do these large consultations on our use of that water because we know the science will draw down those springs to a point. We're a 1% user. The DoD was a 1% user. It's all of Joint Base San Antonio, 11 locations across 4 different counties, 50,000 acres, X number of million people, a 1% user. We were still required to consult on that water use. 99% of that use is private. 99% of that use is downstream water rights to the Colorado River or Guadalupe River. 99% of that use is the competition for the space, the working land space to convert it into the fastest growing area in the country. If you've ever seen some of that between Austin and San Antonio, it's ridiculous. Absolutely, the conversion rate of working lands to fragmented housing lands or suburban. Mike, I think mentioned it. You know, we can find these species that much rather be conserved on a working land than they would be under a Walmart parking lot. But we all know that we need Walmart parking lots. We need places to live, and people need places to live. But it's a balance of that resources. So a lot of times it's that community effort, and it's dovetailing not only just the Section 7 compliance component, but with and I haven't heard anyone say this today, so I get to use the $10,000 word, the dichotomy of the Endangered Species Act. Different pathways for federal and non-federal. Federal is simple, 781, 782, enjoy. Non-federal habitat conservation plans, different title, Section 10 stuff. A whole variety, and they can't play with one another, but they can be complementary. So that's what we end up finding with that Edwards Aquifer. There's a bear and great, or Edwards Aquifer itself, Southern Edwards Plateau Aquifer Protection Plan or Habitat Conservation Plan. It would be silly for us to on post to say, hey, we only water on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and then off post that the community chooses to water on Thursdays and Fridays. Well, I can't remember whether I'm on post today or not on post today, or what am I trying to tell my constituents here on the installation of when they can take care of their ranges versus when I go home to my own sprinkler system kind of things. I've got to use water differently, or remember I use water differently. So the thing that really was unifying there was the service just asking the developers of that habitat conservation plan and the developers of us with our Section 7 requirement, make sure we realize what the right hand, left hand each were doing. Neither could trump the other. There were clear, unique nuances. Airplanes got to get washed. Sorry, Department of Defense, we can't give that piece up. But we probably don't need that beautiful water pond out front spewing water and evaporating nonstop in front of the commander's quarters. We could probably turn that thing off. Good luck. Yeah. Well, commander, sir, man, which do you want? The water fountain? You want that airplane in the sky? Turn that fountain off. You know, so it gives you those common, and again, those, and I'm really emphasizing that the potential partners in the motives, it really gives you that common ground, common understanding. On all those things I mentioned, Camp Bullis is the only one I came in as like the action agency. I was the natural resource manager. All the other ones had years of history before I walked into it. And so just realizing that too, no matter how far along down the road you are, or where you're at in the implementation of the ACP or part of these processes, it never hurts to go back to that. What are our current motivations? Are they still the same ones? What are the new opportunities? That information exchange. I didn't really get that until I went from, you know, San Antonio, is forced to travel the world with my job and see how this person had this solution, how this person had that solution, how this person had that solution, or this little piece. And so that's what really came all the way full circle, is just that cross-pollination component. Defining biology and ecosystem separate protocols. Sometimes that's easy, sometimes it's hard. That's up to the species. You know, we can argue that. We're going to continue to argue that. I've got technically a white-tailed deer biologist is what I see myself as. That's what I went to school for. How I got in T&E and DOD, I have no idea, but we'll sit around and argue about, you know, deer biology with people that are doing it nonstop. And I haven't been in that realm for 20 years. So just understand that people are going from those different locations when they're trying to set those. But in the end, gotta have some type of unifying ecological, biological context. That's the basis for all of it. That's what Center for Biological Diversity or others, NGOs, those are the things that win lawsuits against the service and others, is not everyone talking the same talk or walking the same walk. So find some of those. Also, the momentums with anything, but that's hard. Tackle the hard questions. But really, that whole goal that is, you know, it's section, and it's, I'll go back to conservation without conflict, give them one little sales pitch. That's the other thing. But what is that? What's the difference with conservation without conflict? And I said, what's the difference between negotiation and collaboration? That's really the thing that they're cracking that nut out. All these previous HCPs and Section 7 is all transactional. And if you walk in to buy a car, you want to save at least $1. They want to make at least $1. That's that negotiation component that has made so many of the Section 7 compliance documents, so many of the HCPs be that transactional thing. That we always feel like we want a little bit more, the service wants a little bit more, someone wants a little bit more. The difference is getting transition into that collaborative mindset. How can you do that? What are the tools needed to do that? To be collaborative, it means we got to kind of sit down more as a family. The 4 or 5 of us, we're not going to agree on everything. We're going to disagree on some really hard points, but we're going to be able to walk out of there and go to lunch later. Or we're going to be able to walk out of there and realize, you know what, so-and-so needs this. That is a valid point. That's one of those things that's, you know, motivating this partner, at least giving that understanding and that hearing a lot of times. That's that bridge between, you know, getting to that collaborative piece. And having some of these just demonstrated things has really helped. You know, that helps in your momentum. That helps build a unified kind of methodology and way forward. But again, I'm between y'all and lunch. I'm here the rest of the day. Y'all get to grill the heck out of us in a little while. So looking forward to that. My next slide is a question slide, which is OBE, overcome by events, because we're at the end. So appreciate it. We'll talk there in a little bit.